fast.
Ooh, okay. Good thing we've done it here before.
Okay, so students are great Cornell and help you with the career. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to add.
But we're good over in the amphitheater?
Yeah, that speed's really good here.
Sweet.
Amphitheater is running around 9 nights.
Okay.
But it went for an hour and 40 minutes without
Sweet.
any issues. So.
Just got asked to do a TEDx at the Case Summit.
Oh yeah, where's that going to
Pretty
be?
crazy, yeah.
Okay, so
That'd be terrifying.
I just tweeted, but what did I do?
But good.
What it is you have to, okay, if you want it to connect to R,
that's why.
you have to use the hashtag, which is PCCW.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah,
I was telling you about the mic.
PCCW. Oh gosh, no, I just,
You want me to go provide motion for it to process?
no, I did PCCW.
CPU 53, 56.
2013. Right. So anything you post with that, I'll be able to collect it afterwards for your story. Okay. Yeah. Because we're doing a story behind.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can't stop progress.
No, you know, and everyone's like, no! I'm like, yes!
Yes. Once you try it, you'll like it.
Exactly. I got started Twitter. It just launched.
Hello.
I started it in the fall, but we didn't announce it until like 2 weeks ago.
Better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah, I'm like, you're not going to fire me?
Exactly. Are they even going to notice?
They're like, what? I'm like, whatever. Go with it. I've never seen anything inappropriate.
Especially they have elective
Amazing. But we're growing. It's coming. It's coming.
Even Justin Bieber started with this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's why we do this for the live stream. Check me really not. Yeah. If people see what we're doing, we'll get more followers.
Next year, we want to do flat screens around that let people see the back channel.
Yeah.
Just kind of forcing them to realize that there's a back channel.
I know.
You can participate in the full event, or you can miss out on part of it.
I know.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah. Yeah.
But thank you for facilitating.
Oh, yeah, it's our pleasure.
Can I get
Katie and Margery, nice to meet you. See you again, man. You got your stuff. You got your stuff. Oh, I wondered when that was coming. Okay.
I know, it was impressive. It was. It was very impressive.
That's mine. Awesome.
Who's it?
So we want to do the questions on Facebook. What's that? Will you be able to see Facebook? The questions?
I just don't want you to be in the
Yeah, I think Liz is going to ask. But she's only going to be following Twitter. Oh, she is? I think so.
Oh, yeah, I'll be able to see.
Can I introduce you to Keith Hannon?
Yeah, hi Keith.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, Meredith Rosenberg. Hello.
Trustee.
Hey, I'm yes.
And we have representatives. Lots of things, including press.
I work in online education.
Okay.
Social media, networking, community building.
Great.
Andrew's kind enough to let me ask some questions about what you guys are doing. So.
He has answers.
Yeah, I know. So I want to make that introduction to Erica for you. Okay. Can you, what would be really helpful, can you just write me a blurb of the talk that you
I just didn't know even with the
or
laws.
like, I want to
Just
put it in context.
One day,
About flying.
can you hear me?
So I saw him in
Hi.
Can you do it again?
He was like, oh, I don't know. He was like, what do you want to do?
Are you mic'd? It's hard with everyone in the room talking, but I think it's okay.
are people on Facebook working. So my institution, I just literally went up there. You want it? My institution, what do you or me know? Yeah, no problem. I'll share it all. March 11th of the day. So 19 women out of all of I know. Nothing has the hair. And you got the side now. She does about you right here.
Yep. 20 seconds?
I should tweet. I should be on there.
How you doing?
Katie says 20 seconds. Katie says 20 seconds.
Good afternoon, ladies. We're going to get started in just about 30 seconds.
Let me do it on my iPad.
Good afternoon. Today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to Ms. Margery Mayer, a true pioneer in the world of educational technology. I've had the pleasure of working with Margery for many years at Scholastic, and she is absolutely one of the most committed and results-oriented leaders that I have ever encountered. Education is not just a job or a career for Margery. It's her passion. And she brings that passion every day as the president of Scholastic Education, where she's responsible for the product development, marketing, and sales for the division. Margery's credited with moving Scholastic into the world of educational technology with its premier reading intervention program, Read 180, and its next generation program, Read 180 Next Generation. Margery has also led the development of a foundational reading program for older students who struggle with basic phonics, named System 44, and a comprehensive language arts intervention program that merges digital and print curricula, Expert 21. These programs are helping hundreds of thousands of students today in over 35,000 classrooms nationwide. It's hard to describe the impact that Margery has had on the field of education, but I think that one of our colleagues had a very good description that I want to share with you. For over 30 years, there has been a gap between the ever-present chatter about the promise of technology in education and the reality of it actually making a difference in the lives of kids. More than any other individual in educational publishing, Margery has bridged that gap between promise and practice. Margery has been widely acclaimed for her accomplishments and was recently inducted into the Educational Publishing Hall of Fame. Please join me in welcoming Margery Mayer for what promises to be a fascinating discussion on the K12 Revolution.
Well, I'm delighted to be here today. As I was flying in on a plane that I thought Robert Redford might have flown in out of Africa, I was thinking about the last time I came to Ithaca, and it was in 1974. And I hitchhiked here from my college, which was Middlebury, with my boyfriend and a plastics professor, and I think he was inappropriate. But I remember having a great time camping at the dorm and listening to the Grateful Dead. And I told this story to my driver that brought me here, and he said, it's just exactly like that. It's still hitchhike here and hear a great concert and have a great time. And I actually don't feel that different from when I came in 1974. So anyways, it's so much fun to be here with all of you. Linda asked me to speak, and I asked her if it would be okay if I talked about something that's on my mind all the time, and that is on the incredible amount of change that is going on in K-12 education right now. And that's why I call it a revolution. You know, I'm going to guess that everybody in the room doesn't realize how big a revolution is going on right now, because there's so much just bubbling right below the surface, and then it's about to boil over, I think. And it reminds me a little bit of Arab Spring. Even people that were living in those countries didn't really realize how much was going on. Even after Tunisia fell, I don't think people in Egypt knew that there was going to be a revolt in Egypt and that it was going to bring down Mubarak. I think if I'd been Mubarak and I'd known that, I probably would have gotten out of there. And it's just, I think we're seeing some of the same things going on in K-12 now. I know because I had lunch and I got to talk to some of you that this is like a super high-powered group, super intellectual, smart, reads everything, listens to the smartest TV shows. There's probably people in here that watch C-SPAN. Talk to smart friends. I know you're all smart. So I don't want to hurt your feelings by saying that you might not know everything that's going on in K-12. But the reason you might not know everything that's going on in K-12 is because it's pretty hard to know what's going on in K-12. There's only one national television reporter covering K-12, Rahima Ellis. The New York Times has an education reporter, but that reporter changes all the time. It seems to be not the most desirable beat. It's tough. Now, you know, you can pick up the newspaper and find articles about education. So today there's a really interesting article on the front page of the New York Times about closing a school in New York. So you do see these articles, but trying to weave them all into a big story is tough. So for example, in the presidential election, education. Anybody ever remember either candidate talking about education? If you do, you're unusual because it was not a topic. And I think one of the virtues of having a presidential election every 4 years is that we do get to hear about things, even though some of those things are incredibly stupid, like legitimate rape. So you do hear things and you get to talk about it and hear it debated. Education was not part of that conversation. And that's because there's really not very much difference in policy between the Democrats and the Republicans. They're both pushing school choice. They're pushing what I would call teacher accountability rather than just pure accountability. And really, there's hardly any difference. So it really hit me hard how this teacher revolution is this education revolution is sort of unknown. I was on a really posh bike trip this summer. These are like the poshest people I've ever known. 3 of them are on the boards of major universities. They're bankers, lawyers. They give to charter schools. Every single one of them knows how to fix every school in America. Which, because everybody went to school, everybody thinks that they know how to fix education. So, and believe me, these guys, the richer you are, the more sure you are that you can fix education. So when we were there one night, and I mentioned the new Common Core state standards, and not one person at the table had ever heard this term. And this was in August of 2012, including my husband, who I do live with and I do talk to. So, you know, when my husband didn't know what this was, I was like, wow, this is a secret revolution. So, you know, just like with other revolutions, there's a real strong sense of out with the old and in with the new. The revolutions are not evolutionary. People aren't looking for small change in education in the United States. They're looking for massive change in the United States. A lot of the people that are driving the K12 revolution are young, and they don't have much regard for things that have been going on in the past. And you can see why they feel this way. There's a lot of reasons why people would be upset with American education. So one of the things that you hear in the news is you hear people talk about how the U.S. is doing on international assessments, TIMSS and PISA, and we don't do very well on those. We're, you know, like 20th, 21st, 17th, you know, we're behind lots and lots of countries. You know, that's upsetting, but that's not what upsets me as much as the data that we're seeing on what we call NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So this is a test that's administered by the federal government. It's a sampling test. We sample kids in all 50 states. And then we benchmark the results of all 50 states against a national standard, which says, here's what is roughly what it means to be on grade level. So what those tests say, and they're pretty much unchanged for, they're given every 4 years. It's pretty much unchanged. You can go back kind of as far as you want. It's pretty much stayed the same. There's small improvements, and you see some little improvements if you just aggregate the data by race and genders and things like that. But basically what they say is, I'm just going to talk about 8th grade, because I think that's, you know, that's the important one. By 11th grade, when they give the test, kids have been so tested, they just blow it off. And a lot of kids who would show up not doing well on that test are no longer in school. And anyway, by 8th grade, only 2/3 of only 1/3 of kids are doing on grade level work. And the other 2/3 of kids are not doing on grade level work. And then when you take that number apart, it gets a lot more upsetting, because what basically, if you remember one thing from my talk, and this is not going to be surprising, so it's going to be totally easy to remember, the most important differentiation in success in American schools is economic level. Poor kids do worse. And we have more poor kids going into school now than we ever have. So about 25% of incoming kindergartners are living below the poverty line, which is the highest percentage of kids we've had living below the poverty line coming to school since probably the Depression. So we have an enormous number of poor kids coming to school. They are, as you guys all know, they're concentrated in some areas. It's not just cities, it's also rural. But I live in a really nice place. I live in Larchmont, New York. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's great. Okay, so you know.
Quick Amy
You live in
tweet.
Rock? Okay, we'll have to get together later. But you know, in Larchmont, we do have some people that United Way supports. We have there is some Title I money going into the Merrimack schools, which Larchmont's part of. But basically, it is a suburban, privileged community. But then if you drive to White Plains and some of the other places around us, high poverty, high level of struggle. And the cost of this is just very, very sad on a human level and on an economic level. So we have about 3,000 kids every single day in the United States that drop out of school. That's the equivalent of like a whole high school, a big high school, closing every day. And when you look at some of the cities like Cleveland and some cities where it's just almost impossible to get a good education, they have graduation rates for the whole system that are 30% of high school. And then when you start to look at how many of the kids who graduate from high school actually graduate from college, it gets even worse. So you can see why people think, man, things really have to change in American education. It's just not working. So I want to talk about 4 things that are going on that I think are like part of this revolution, and I hope that I won't be too boring here, but here they are. So the first one is this idea of the Common Core State Standards. How many people have heard of the Common Core State Standards? Okay, that's good. So most of you have. As you probably know, the people who wrote the standards took a look at these international tests and said, what do we have to do? What do we have to teach our kids in order for them to be able to perform well on, Tom Friedman's flat world? And so they rewrote the curriculum, and it's narrower. There's fewer objectives to teach, and it's more rigorous. So they increased like the reading level requirements in each grade. They made it tougher. And 46 states, including the District of Columbia, have adopted the Common Core Standards. So if I was sitting there, I'd say, okay, well, which states didn't? You could probably guess two, but I'm not going to make you. Texas, not surprising, and Alaska are two. But even in Texas, there are districts that have adopted the standards for themselves. And in Alaska, the standards are their standards, but because they're so Republican, they don't call them Common Core Standards, they just call them the Alaska Standards. Yeah, so that's fine. And then the other states that didn't adopt them are Nebraska, Minnesota, and Virginia for a variety of different reasons, but those states are all upping their rigor as well. So this is like a huge change in American education, because before that we had each state have their own standards. A lot of them were very, very microscopic. Teachers were teaching these tiny little standards, and now we have this smaller set of more difficult standards. And what's going to go with those standards are new assessments. So each state has pretty much had its own state test, and those state tests have been calibrated to say, well, what does it mean to be a proficient reader or proficient at math in each state? And it's all over the place. So you might look at a state like my home state, Alabama, and what they would say is proficient is maybe 2 grades level below what that NAEP test said that I talked about at the beginning. So what's going to happen now with these new state tests is there's going to be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Everybody's going to take tests, they're going to be benchmarked to a national standard, and we're going to know exactly how our kids are doing. And that's one reason why the test scores are all going to go down. And they just went down in New York, as probably a lot of you know. It's not that the kids got dumber over the past year, the tests got harder. So the other thing that's going to happen is that teachers are going to have to be educated really to teach these standards, because they look different. They are different. There's supposed to be more emphasis on student work, student discussion. Kids are supposed to write. They're supposed to pull meaning out of text. When they do a math problem, they're supposed to not just apply an algorithm, they're supposed to tell you like what they did, why they did it, and explain their answer to you. These are not things that a lot of teachers have been asked to do. And they don't know exactly what Common Core learning looks like. So that is going to be a massive human capital task for our nation. We have about 3.5 million teachers in the United States, and just about every one of them is going to be affected by this. Because even if you're not a language arts, math, or science teacher, if you're a social studies teacher, an art teacher, you're going to be asked to have your kids read more nonfiction text so that they can transfer those reading skills into the language arts classroom. So that's number one, is the Common Core Standard and the assessments that go with it, which is just, it's the biggest change in curriculum that I have seen in my career. Oh, and by the way, I just want to mention one other thing, because if you read the Wall Street Journal today, you're going to see an article that New York City just adopted a set of materials to teach the Common Core. Because one of the things that school districts are saying is, wow, this is so different, we can't use our old stuff. We have school districts where we go in and they say, we can't use anything that's more than 2 years old because it doesn't support the Common Core. Now, if you have a book that has Romeo and Juliet in it, and it's 9th grade, it's still Romeo and Juliet, right? So, I think so. But school districts are looking for new lessons to go with Romeo and Juliet that get it sort of a different, more profound level of reading. So in New York City, if you read the Wall Street Journal, as I said, they just adopted a new curriculum. One of the programs they adopted was one that we published, and we did it in partnership with New York City. We're publishing a 6, 7, 8 curriculum for language arts. And New York City said they're going to spend $56 million to put new curriculum into every school in New York City. So I'm mentioning this partly because the cost of putting in Common Core, expensive. The cost, there's a lot of discussion about what the cost is going to be of these new assessments. Probably going to be expensive because kids are going to be giving writing samples, those are going to have to be graded. It's not going to all be multiple choice that you put in a Scantron machine to get a grade. Okay, so then the second element I just want to mention, going back to that idea that we have to help our teachers, is teacher evaluation. And this is big. The Obama administration put a program in place called Race to the Top, which I think a lot of you guys have heard about. It was basically a competition where states had to apply for hundreds of millions of dollars. And in order to get, to win, for your application to win, you were scored according to a rubric. And on that rubric, there were things that you were supposed to do. And the Obama administration accomplished a lot of their agenda by putting the competition in place. Because one of the things they asked for was a teacher evaluation system. So states that didn't win the money, they still put teacher evaluation systems in. They still had their legislatures go in and put teacher evaluation systems in. And this is right at the heart of the revolution because the reformers and the teacher unions are like this, right? And I mean, you guys see this and hear this all the time. The reformers want teachers evaluated based on tangible performance, measures of performance, including test scores. And the reformers believe in pay for performance. And they're working to put an end to tenure. And in Florida, they put an end to tenure. If you're an incoming teacher, you are not going to be able to have tenure in Florida. The teacher unions, on the other hand, argue that they, more than anyone, want what's best for kids. And the teacher unions, I think, are completely honest when they say they want the very best, most effective teachers in the classroom. Some of them have been okay on the idea of evaluations. Where it really breaks down is like, how are those evaluations going to be measured? So teacher unions, and I agree, do not believe that you want to pay for performance based on a simple standardized test score, because they don't feel that standardized tests measure everything that's going on in the classroom. And this is still going on. There's still a lot of discussion. If you're from New York, you may have read a couple of months ago that New York was not granted, I think it was $400 million in federal funding, something like that. And that was because the Bloomberg administration and the teachers union in New York could not agree on what a meaningful evaluation system would be. And so the state and the U.S. Department of Ed withheld Race to the Top money that would have come to New York City because of that disagreement. Okay, so element number 3 is drastic changes in the educational structure of schooling. So, so for a very long time, we've had districts that run schools, sometimes small districts, sometimes big districts. They tended to be very top-down. At the district level, the district would make virtually all decisions, and then the principals and the schools and the teachers would implement those decisions. Well, that is crumbling around us. So decentralized decision-making is epidemic. It's in most major school districts. They have tried, there's efforts in place to have the principals have control, a lot more control, make a lot more decisions about what's going on, and then those principals are held accountable. It's a lot easier to move a principal out of a job than a teacher, so you hear all the time about principals who haven't succeeded that are being moved out of schools. And so, for example, in New York City, very decentralized. Los Angeles, very decentralized. I mean, almost every single big city now is very decentralized. And the theory is really that the team in the school has to take ownership of the performance of that school, that it can't be decided from on high. So one of the things you're also seeing is a lot of central offices are shrinking in school districts, and they're sending people back into the schools. And connected to that is there's a lot of closing and reopening of schools. And New York Times, story about this today. This is happening all the time. It's a good article because it talks about Bloomberg. It says that Bloomberg brags about how many schools he closes, and there's people in the article that say, you know what? Is that really something to brag about? Isn't that kind of a sad and terrible thing to be closing schools? The school that they profile that's closing is a high school that serves mostly kids from the Dominican Republic. And the principal's quoted as saying that half of his students leave in the middle of the year. Now that is, and go back to their families in the Dominican Republic. That is a very difficult. Here, come on down.
I got it.
There's lots of seats. Very, very difficult. But there's a lot of opening and closing of schools. There's a lot of schools being set up that have they're designed to appeal to kids. Technical schools. You're seeing schools where there's early college, so that kids can, if they're done with high school, they can go ahead and go to college. Very big trend. And then connected to that trend, and this is one that I think is understated really in its importance, is the rapidly increasing number of charter schools. So I assume people pretty much know what a charter school is, but I'm gonna define it anyway. So it's a public school, and usually they're set up so they must accept students of all abilities. But it's usually chartered by the state, and thus is not governed by the district in which it resides. So that means it doesn't have to comply with district rules, it doesn't have to use the curriculum the district says, it doesn't have to do everything the district tells it to, but this is a really important part, and this is part of why it's part of the revolution. It usually is not unionized. So charter schools tend to have more ability to hire and fire than other schools. Now, the charter movement is growing really, really fast. So, when you see estimates of how many kids might be in charter schools, if we look down a few years, you hear estimates like 10% of public school children. I think that's low. I think it's going to be more than that because it's growing so fast, and it's I'm surprised by how many people want to run a charter school because it's really, really hard work. A lot of states are increasing the number of charters they're handing out. That's also connected to that Race to the Top application. I was with a couple of superintendents from North Carolina a month ago, and one was Raleigh and one was Charlotte Mecklenburg, and both of them think that a third of their schools are going to be charter next year. And when you listen to district leaders, and not these two leaders, but other district leaders talk about this, it creates a lot of stress on their system, they think, because they feel that the charters are skimming the best kids, even though they have pretty much open admissions. They feel that charters are pushing kids out that aren't doing well on tests. They feel that charters have parents who are more motivated and work the system, so it's a self-selection process. But I think that charters are here to stay. The results are, there's some great charters. I'm a huge fan of some of the charter schools I go into. I'm a huge fan of KIPP Academy, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. Fantastic, the work they're doing. But there are also charters that aren't that great, and we need to make sure that all of our kids are in good schools. So the fourth element that I would mention is really impacting education is technology. And I could talk about technology for a really long time because that's what I do. Primarily what we do is we think about how to use technology to solve the most challenging things in school. So just to elaborate a little bit on what Linda was talking about, I'm in charge of a division of Scholastic. We have about $250 million in revenue. About 2/3 of that revenue, it comes from products that incorporate technology. They're not all a pure technology play, but that's big in American education. There are not many companies that are doing that kind of business in technology. And the other third is a consulting business to schools to help them use technology well. So we have teachers, consultants, coaches that go into schools and work on implementation of technology, which schools need the help because this is a big part of the revolutionary change. So just to talk about a little bit of what some of the technology is in schools. So there's a lot of interest in online courses and online learning. And I'm going to tell you I'm not a huge fan of that. And the reason I'm not a huge fan of that is I'm a huge fan of teachers. Now, a lot of what I do is work with schools that have struggling students. And those students need not only help academically, they need help emotionally, socially, and I think we way underestimate as a culture the role of teachers and how important they are to achievement. So I'm not a super big fan of online learning. Now, I think sometimes it has its place. Like you have a motivated kid and there's a course they want to take and they can't get it in their school and they want to take it. I think that's fantastic. You probably have heard about a company called Coursera, which is offering courses from Stanford and a bunch of other colleges. You know, they had 100,000 students sign up for a computer science class. I think that's great. It's free, great. But we're seeing some states pass legislation that says kids must take an online course to get a high school degree. They must take it. And I honestly think that is because they are being lobbied by people whose business it is to sell online education. So I'm not saying it has no place, but I think that I have a measured feeling about it. But it's happening and it's going to happen more. There are companies that are offering kids the ability to do their entire coursework online. And they're working with school districts and get paid by the school district to do that, so that's happening. Another big thing that's happening is differentiated learning based on data that's coming out of technology. So kids are in and we do this with Read 180 and our other products we do. So we capture every keystroke when a kid is working in our software. Those keystrokes, all that data goes into our management system. We analyze it, and then we give recommendations back to the teacher for what she can do with that information. So we dynamically regroup kids. You know, we also believe that information should go back to the kid, because one of the things that we believe in is that kids need to be more empowered about their futures, and they need to know how they're doing. We think there's been too much. We think one of the problems with kids not achieving more is they've been lied to. They've been told that they're doing well when they're not doing well. And we want kids to know how they're really doing. And we want them to know, here's what you need to do this career. So we believe in redundancy of data, but that role of data is big. And the Gates Foundation, which is doing a lot of fantastic work in education, fantastic. One of the things they're doing is they're building a large student information system so that student data can go into the system and that data can travel to the students. So it's a little bit like on the model of a big healthcare system, where if you're in the system and you go from one hospital to another, the hospital knows, okay, well, you have a drug allergy or whatever it is that was in your record. So Gates is underwriting this gigantic effort to create an open system that will capture student data and get smarter with time and help make recommendations of what those students might need. Another big role of technology in school is social networking. Now, it's not as big as you might think, because a lot of schools do not want kids social networking all the time. And we have a lot of schools that don't want kids to bring their phones to school. We have a lot of schools that are just worried about what happens in social networking, but it's still going on. Teachers are using social networking to communicate with kids. And I think we're going to see more social networking. I think the Common Core is going to encourage some social networking because we're going to have kids all over the country working on some of the same things, and I think that's going to happen. I mean, I'm a huge believer in technology. I do worry a little bit about some of what's going on with it. There's like the biggest love affair with iPads in American education. It's just incredible. I mean, it's like the iPad is a big hunky guy. San Diego public schools and Chicago public schools were two of the biggest purchasers of iPads of any organizations in the country last year. When I go to a meeting with teachers, and I bet you everybody here has an iPad, so I have an iPad. I think it's a big hunky guy. But when I go to meetings with teachers, every single teacher in the room has an iPad. There is something going on with iPads. They are everywhere. We have large school districts that are saying they want everything in 2 years to be digital. They want to get rid of books. They want everything on a tablet. They want everything personalized. And there's a lot of analysis going on right now about the economics of this. And we have in San Diego, they feel that it's much cheaper to have given every kid an iPad than to have them buy books. Maybe they're right. It could be true. But we're talking about I think when we look at schools 5 years from now, you're going to pretty much see every kid with a personal device. One of the things that concerns me about that is distraction. I'm distracted by my personal devices. I read last week in the paper that when the new team went from the Apple Store to JCPenney, which hasn't been working out that well, but when the new team went to JCPenney, they were analyzing, they couldn't believe how much bandwidth they were using in the corporate office in Fort Worth at JCPenney. And then when they unpacked it, they found that 35% of that bandwidth was watching recreational YouTubes. And you know, it's tempting. You know, somebody comes in your office and they want you to see that Honey Badger YouTube video, and you watch it, right? So imagine you're 12 years old and you're walking around with a device that can go on the internet. We're going to have to, it's going to create a lot of challenges for teachers to think about how do we use that technology in the right way. We're going to have to teach kids so it's going to be another classroom management tool, but I think ultimately it's going to be a good thing. The fact is that the school walls are just a lot more porous. We have a lot more access to the web. We have more data. It's just changing. And you know, if I go back to my analogy of the Arab Spring, some people call that the Twitter revolution, because without Twitter, Facebook, without social networking, you know, I think it's probably true that it would have taken longer for people that felt that in Tunisia, in Egypt, Libya, Syria. I think it would have taken longer for like-minded people to come together and think about what should happen next. And technology is a giant part of what I call the K12 revolution. So now I guess, you know, the question is this revolution for the good? I was trying to put a face on it. And I was trying to think, is this revolution going to look more like, you know, George Washington? Or is it going to look more like Robespierre, who ended up guillotined at the end of the French Revolution? So I consider myself an educator, and I think all educators are optimistic. I mean, I just think it's right in your DNA. You can't help it. You believe that all kids can learn. You could believe that good things are going to happen. So I believe this revolution is going to be a good thing. And like with all revolutions, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be some mistakes. We're going to have some ideologues push some things that aren't the right thing. But in the end, I think we all agree that we want the best for our kids, and change is needed, and ultimately, I think, will be for the good. Thanks.
Thank you, Margery. That was very interesting. We now are going to have time, about 15 minutes for Q&A, and Leslie is going to walk around with the mic. We ask that because we are live streaming this, Before you ask your question, you please wait for the microphone so that the people who are participating online have the benefit of hearing your question.
Hi, thank you for talking about the changes in elementary and secondary education. I was wondering what part of the curriculum with the change in technology and is focused on original work versus sourcing of data and the cheating, I guess. The process that all of us in the room went through was probably very different in terms of going to card catalogs and looking at different sources and utilizing books and not having plagiarism. How are teachers dealing with that, and how is the educator community doing?
Yeah, so, well, there's one mechanical way they're dealing with this, and there's a couple of companies out there that kids are supposed to submit their written work to, which checks that written work against a giant database and can tell you and can give a pretty good assessment of whether that work was plagiarized or not. It's a big part of the Common Core to have more original work, more project-based learning, and I think we are. I think that is going to happen because when teachers can move away from all that microscopic coverage of standards, they're going to have more time for that kind of work. It's going to be a lot of work for our teachers to grade that work. And one of the things that I didn't talk about is what's going on in funding in education. It's definitely tight. After the stimulus that we had when Obama came into office, it's been tough. A lot of teachers have been let go. Class sizes up. So now you're looking at middle school and high school teachers that are carrying workloads of 150 kids. So when you're asking teachers to do that have kids do that kind of work, and then especially in schools where kids have a long way to go before they're doing really strong academic work, that is an enormous task for teachers to do. And you can understand why teachers don't want to give out weekly writing assignments to 150 kids. I mean, honestly, it's like humanly impossible. And one of the things we're seeing teachers burn out. We're seeing a lot of really great young people go into education. I know there are people that don't love Teach for America. I think it's fantastic. But it's so exciting to think that there's a program where kids are competing to get into, then those same kids might have competed to get into Harvard Law School. So yes, there's challenges with Teach for America, but some of these kids are going into Teach for America, very, very difficult. Other great kids are going into the classroom. I was just talking to Linda, her brother left a great job at a law firm to become an assistant principal, and he likes it, but he's, it's tough, Linda, isn't it? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is the core curriculum, is that applied to charter schools as well? And the second question is, in a lot of countries outside of the United States, at a point probably around 8th or 9th grade, they make a decision that this person doesn't seem to have an aptitude for sort of the traditional kind of study that we talk about here in the United States. Is there any real thought about what we used to call vocational education, but I don't know if they call it now?
Okay, so question number one on the charter schools. I think the charter schools are going to teach the Common Core because they're going to be measured on how kids are learning, and I think they're going to have to take the same tests that the public school kids do. So I expect they will teach Common Core. On your second question on vocational learning, it's such a great question, and some of the successes we're seeing in high schools are these high schools that are doing vocational education. So, I was in a great high school in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is about cooking, and kids are staying in school. Now, one of the differences that you hear people say when they talk about vocational education in Europe versus vocational education here is there's still a high emphasis on academics. So yes, they do have kids separate out. Some kids are going, going into trade, but they don't let go of the fact that kids have to be able to read critically. They might not be preparing them for their A levels, so they go to a first grade college or university, but they don't let go of still being able to think, read, and do math at a conceptual level. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what people say.
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions as well. The first is, with the new standards, will that help prepare students to go into the STEM work? And the second is, as this really does require more work and more teachers to get through all of this, knowing it's going to increase costs, I'm sure somebody's done the work to understand what the costs would be to maximize the work. Do we know what that looks like nationally? And is there a plan to talk about that and figure out how to get that?
Wow. Okay. Question number one, STEM. I think it's going to help STEM education because I think that I think that by focusing kids in math and science on understanding, I think it's going to help them. Because what we see happen with kids who rely on memorization, they flatline at some point. We work with somebody named Marilyn Burns. She is the great math educator in the United States. She has been testing interview questions with middle school kids. One of the questions she tested was, do this in your head, not you, you guys can do this in your sleep. Ask kids in their head, how much is 100 minus 97? Only about between 50 and 60% of kids can do that in their head and get it right. About half of the other kids who, the other 40%, about half of them had to do with their finger, they did the algorithm, and the other half just got it wrong. So, when you're talking about 8th graders, they don't understand, right, that addition and subtraction are inverse relationships. That's an incredibly easy problem. So, but that is not because kids aren't smart. They are smart. We just didn't teach them how to do that kind of thinking. So I think this is going to be good. And the other thing the other reason I'm excited about the Math Common Core is I think in many ways it's going to be something of an equalizer. I think that our kids who are in lower achieving schools, if they get the right math education, it can open up a lot of opportunities for them that aren't open now. Now, your second question about the cost of Common Core. I've never seen a really careful economic analysis of it. I'm sure it exists because there's so many wonks in education. It's impossible it doesn't exist. But some of the, but when people talk about it, they're concerned about the cost of the assessments. They want to give these assessments on computers. So a lot of schools are spending money buying tablets and computers to get ready for the assessments. And they're concerned about what the per pupil cost will be on the assessments. But there's also optimism around driving costs down. Like, so for example, there's a feeling that if there's so much convergence around what to teach, it creates opportunity for open source materials. So maybe there won't have to be as much focus on buying expensive instructional programs. I honestly don't see any way that it's not going to cost money. I think it is going to cost money, but it's going to cost money to improve our schools. It has to.
If we know how much it is, then at least we have a chance to go figure out, state by state, city by city, county by county, how to go get it.
Yeah. That's a good point. I haven't done this, but I encourage y'all to go back and talk to your local school district about what are they doing about Common Core and ask them. I think you'll find it's a topic of conversation, and it has to be because these new tests are supposedly going to be rolling out in 2014 or 15.
Can you hear me?
We're up
Okay. Hi, my name is Jill Klein, and I teach at the university level in education, and this revolution that you speak about definitely causes those of us in higher ed to be concerned because we're going to get these kids. And we're gonna have to be prepared there. But my question is actually related to the course materials and specifically maybe to your firm or others, in that we don't have course materials that have been optimized for the technology. At best, you've PDF'd your books, and that's a big part of the cost. Can you talk a little bit about what your firm or what other firms are doing to help make course materials, even if they are not open source, available to K-12?
Right, okay, so just about everything we do is engineered from the ground up. At Scholastic, we're not really a traditional textbook publisher. We're a $2 billion company. We're the #1 provider of children's books in the United States. We don't really publish textbooks, even though we did get this, we just got this adoption in New York City. When we create a piece of technology, what we try to do is we try to find some evidence that there's an approach that will have a material effect on human learning. So we, Read 180, for example, which is our best example, we licensed from Vanderbilt. They developed the prototype for Read 180 at the Peabody School of Education. We licensed it from Vanderbilt because it had good data around it, and we are now the largest provider of revenue at Vanderbilt of any technology transfer product in the history of the university. So we start by looking for something that works, and then we create it from the ground up. So that takes a lot of investment. It takes a lot of creativity, but we have not found it to be a very good route to just take things that exist in print and turn them into some kind of flat digital experience. Not to say that that's not okay, because like I read everything on my Kindle. So there's a role for that, right?
It's not very good.
Well, I don't know. I like reading on my Kindle, but that's a reading role. That's not necessarily a learning role. So we're big believers in highly adaptive, highly interactive, data-driven. We're kind of picky about what we do.
Hi, I work with a lot of education technology companies, and it's kind of a crazy field right now because you see, I work with a lot of early stage education technology companies, and it's kind of a crazy field right now because you see teachers who are used to using different apps and stuff in their consumer world then go out and look for something to use in their classroom, and they find something they like and they use it and they share it with their teachers. But it's not necessarily supported by their district or their school, and a lot of it's free. And then you've got all these startup education technologies in Silicon Valley that are trying to make their way in the world, but they're all putting out free products. They can't get any revenue for it.
Right.
And there's a lot of buzz around this idea of blended learning in the classroom. And I'm wondering if you can just like look out 10 years and talk about what you think it's going to look like eventually.
So there's more money being invested in educational technology companies. I'd love, if you know any good ones that you think we should buy, please find them. No, seriously, I'd love to get your card. That would be fantastic. There's more money going into educational technology startups than in the history of business. A lot of them are in Silicon Valley, as you mentioned. There seems to be almost a free flow of money to educational endeavors. Right now, most of them don't have a revenue model. So that's tricky in K-12, because when you think about the revenue model for free content, a lot of it is advertiser supported, or it's free because it's connecting you to something that wants you to buy. Now, in K-12, it's really, like, my business is B2B. I'm selling to the district. Usually the district is buying something and then giving it to the teachers who are my ultimate consumers. Advertising supported, not a good business at K-12. Do we really want our kids to be reading the Gettysburg Address and right next to it is, some kind of condom ad? Maybe that would be good. Okay, that would be good. All right, pick something else, beer. So not a lot of support in our culture for advertising with free content in schools. Having having you click on something and buy it, teachers they don't have a lot of money, they're not going to do a lot of that. So some of the premise, and I'm sure you're seeing this, is that the whole buying system in K-12 is going to flip, and consumers are going to be buying more of the content, or they're going to be telling schools what to buy. So a lot of the money that's going into some of these startups is around this idea that consumers are going to have a bigger voice in education. Are you hearing some of that?
Yeah, we're seeing some of that. The hard thing is that teachers might buy it because they're willing to pay, $2.99 for an app. But when it comes to convincing their principal or their district to buy some,
yeah, and $2.99 an app, you got to sell a lot of those.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I think is a question, so the money's flowing like crazy. There's business conferences where educational startups are getting together. They're huge. There are hundreds of people going to them. But one of the questions is what is the end game for all those businesses? So they either have to grow and become profitable, or they have to have somebody buy them, or they, well, that's really the or and the or. And I think people are questioning more and more how many companies can this really happen to. So it's a fantastic sector to get your feet wet. If you have a great idea, get in there, try something, do something. Hard sector to turn into a good business endeavor. Unless you have something good and come tell me about it and we'll talk. Yeah. One more. You choose. I'm not choosing.
I'm going to condense.
Thank you. On the new testing system for the core curriculum, do you know what type of a system it will be? Will they test every year? Will they test every 3 years? Do you know what's going to happen?
They're supposed to, it's changing. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen, whether or not they're going to test, which grades they're going to test. They want to test every grade because how are we going to evaluate teachers if we don't have data from every grade? But it's possible because it's so expensive that may not end up happening. They may decide not to test in the early grades. It's still, you would think that this close to the deadline, it would be clearer. It's not totally clear. Hey, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, and you'll join us for the transformation in higher education. That's going to be in the amphitheater in 15 minutes. If everyone's